Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in France and America this week. There's going to be a lot of attention-grabbing headlines. Fighter jets, submarines, trade battles, and illegal immigration. But there's one story that we all need to keep our eyes on: nuclear power. After over a decade, India is going to make a big push to get international nuclear power companies to build nuclear reactors in India. And this is a big deal. India's growing economy needs power, lots and lots of it. And without nuclear energy, meeting India's energy needs could be impossible. On this episode of Threadbare, we look at Modi's nuclear diplomacy and why his visits to France and America this week are so important to India's economic future. Let's start with the basics. Ever since India became independent in 1947, it has dreamed of using nuclear energy to power its economy. Nuclear energy is cheaper, often more reliable, and emits fewer pollutants than most other energy sources. India's first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru was a big supporter of India's civilian nuclear energy program. In 1948, he established the Atomic Energy Commission, led by legendary nuclear scientist Homi Bhabha. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, India worked with countries like Canada, America, and the UK to build nuclear power plants in India. It set up power plants at Tarapur, Trombay, and Rajasthan. For a newly independent developing country, this was seen as a great scientific achievement. India also had great hopes for its nuclear energy program, and in 1954, Homi Bhabha said that India would develop 8,000 megawatts, that's 8 gigawatts, of nuclear power generation capacity by 1980. And the idea was that all of this power generation would power India's economic development. Unfortunately, Dr. Bhabha was about 45 years off with that assessment. Today, in 2025, India produces just over 8,000 megawatts of nuclear power. The truth is that India's nuclear energy program has been hit by problems and snags, which means it has never really reached the promise it once had. India's Pokhran nuclear test in 1974 caused many international partners, particularly those in the West, to snap nuclear cooperation with India. After that, India was excluded from accessing key nuclear-related technologies from abroad. Other problems, like the high cost of building nuclear power plants in a very, very poor country, limited how much nuclear power India could generate. So the bottom line is that the program has promised a lot and unfortunately delivered much less than India needed. But things could be changing, and that's why Prime Minister Modi's visit to France and America matters. You see, despite all the disappointments, India still needs nuclear power badly. Currently, India has a power generation capacity of around 415 gigawatts, of which only 8 gigawatts comes from nuclear power. But if India's economy continues to grow, India will need something like 4,000 gigawatts of installed power capacity by 2050. And various estimates tell us that renewable power sources like solar, wind, and hydropower can't meet such massive requirements. So to meet India's energy needs in a clean, sustainable way, it needs nuclear power. That's why in this year's Union Budget, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman announced that India would target the development of 100 gigawatts of nuclear power capacity by 2047. She also announced that India would amend its 2010 Nuclear Liability Law and the Atomic Energy Act to perhaps encourage more foreign nuclear companies to set up plants in India. Now, this is really important because you see, around 20 years ago, India concluded a civilian nuclear agreement with America. This deal allowed India to finally access top nuclear technology as well as fuel from around the world. The hope was that foreign companies would then come to India, set up power plants, and rapidly scale up nuclear power production. But then there was a big snag. In 2010, India introduced a nuclear liability law, which has since then haunted efforts to attract international companies. This law makes suppliers of nuclear equipment potentially liable for damages in the events of a nuclear accident. This means that if something goes wrong at a nuclear plant, the company that supplied the equipment could be held responsible and would have to pay compensation. Now, a large number of countries follow international conventions that primarily place liability on the operator of the nuclear plant, not the supplier. Despite the fact that India has offered numerous clarifications and assurances to foreign companies, this liability law has been a persistent issue. Noted strategic affairs expert Ashley Tellis points out that India's negotiations with France for 6 nuclear power plants have been slow precisely because of this liability law. And American firms have stayed away from the Indian market altogether. It is amply clear by now that for all of the Department of Atomic Energy's successes over the last few decades, India's nuclear renaissance cannot be engineered by its government and its public sector enterprises alone, nor can India's private sector deliver by itself, or even in combination with the Indian state. Reaching India's energy production targets without expanding its carbon footprint will require significant foreign participation in the nuclear industry, writes Ashley Tellis. That's why it was such a big deal when Nirmala Sitharaman announced that India would consider changes to the nuclear liability law. It showed that India is serious about attracting private foreign nuclear firms. Sitharaman also announced an outlay of 20,000 crore rupees for the development of 5 small modular reactors to be operationalized in India by 2033. And that's exactly where Prime Minister Modi's visit to France and America comes in. Both of these countries have wanted to work closely with India for the development of nuclear power. The Prime Minister is expected to seal deals with France to develop SMR reactors during his visit, and American companies like Westinghouse and Holtec have also closely developed SMR technology and could be looking to work with India. Besides that, nuclear power firms from around the world could take note that India is now open for business and could begin investing. Of course, all of this does not mean that problems are magically solved. We still have to see the exact changes that will be made by India in the liability law, and there are still serious regulatory challenges to being in the nuclear business in India. But India badly needs nuclear power, and Modi's visit to France and America could help India get what it needs. Thank you for watching Threadbare with me, Shashank Matu. You can catch this show again next week on India Today Global.